Imagine waking up on a completely normal Tuesday morning.
Right, just a regular day.
Yeah, you reach for your phone, but there's no service. You turn on the TV, and the broadcast networks are just displaying static.
Which is already unsettling.
Exactly. Then you look out the window, and the traffic lights at the major intersection down the street are entirely dark, just a massive gridlock. So you decide to walk to the ATM to get some cash, but the screen just says, network unavailable.
Yeah, complete system failure.
But here's the crazy part. No sirens are blaring. There are no jets screaming overhead. Not a single bomb has been dropped. But your country has just sustained a massive, devastating attack.
It is a terrifying scenario, and, it fundamentally breaks our traditional understanding of conflict.
How so?
Well, we are deeply conditioned to associate war with a very specific cinematic soundtrack, right? Explosions, gunfire, troops physically moving across a map.
Like World War II documentary footage.
Exactly. But that highly visible, kinetic form of warfare is rapidly becoming just the tip of the spear. Or, honestly, in some cases, it's becoming a relic of the past entirely.
And that is exactly what we're getting into today. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking the evolving architecture of modern geopolitical conflict, specifically looking at the dynamics between the US, Israel, and Iran based on our source files.
That's a heavy topic for sure.
It really is. Our mission today is to explore what happens when the absolute limits of physical military escalation are reached. What happens when the traditional missiles stop flying, but the underlying conflict doesn't actually end.
Right, it shifts.
Exactly. It shifts into what is known as the hidden war, this phase of conflict that is silent, largely invisible, but ultimately decides the long-term survival of a nation.
But before we dive into breaking down the mechanics of this, I think we really need to establish the parameters of our discussion.
Good call.
Because the geopolitical realities between the US, Israel, and Iran are incredibly complex and, well, highly charged.
Very charged.
So we want to make it super clear to you listening that our focus today isn't politics. We are not here to pick sides or make moral judgments about the actors involved.
Right. Definitely not endorsing any specific viewpoints here.
No, we are strictly analyzing the strategic architecture of how these modern conflicts are actually fought. We're looking at the factual frameworks of these invisible fronts from the sources and the geopolitical consequences that follow.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the material points to a really fascinating progression. In this modern arena, a military strike, the loud explosion, right, is often just the opening act.
Yeah, it achieves an immediate tactical goal.
Right, but to actually win a prolonged conflict, you have to drain the opponent's underlying capacity to keep fighting. You have to move off the physical battlefield and onto the economic front.
Which is arguably much more devastating over time.
Totally. I like to think of it this way. If a military action is a sudden hammer blow, this economic warfare is like slowly turning off the oxygen valve in a sealed room.
Ooh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. It isn't loud, but it is fatal to a nation's war effort.
That oxygen valve metaphor really hits the nail on the head. You are methodically cutting off the fuel. And according to the files, the economic front operates primarily through three massive levers.
Which are?
Trade restrictions, supply chain disruptions, and the absolute control of global financial flows. We aren't just talking about, standard tariffs here.
But this isn't just a tax on steel.
No, this is the weaponization of the global economy. It's about isolating a specific nation from the fundamental arteries of international commerce.
But I want to challenge the effectiveness of that a little bit, because it sounds a bit, theoretical.
How do you mean?
Well, when we look at nations like Iran, they have been under various forms of severe economic sanctions for decades now.
Decades, yes.
And they are still functioning. They still have a military. If turning off the oxygen is supposed to be fatal, why does it seem to take so incredibly long?
Well, that is the defining characteristic of the economic front. It is a strategy of cumulative degradation, not instant destruction.
Cumulative degradation.
Okay. Yeah, you don't just freeze a central bank account and expect a tank battalion to instantly power down the next afternoon. That's not how it works. Nations build workarounds. They find black markets.
So they find ways to breathe, even with the valve turned down.
Exactly. But those workarounds come at a massive premium. For example, if you block a nation from importing the specific microchips they need for their missile guidance systems.
You can't just buy them off the shelf anymore.
Right, so they might still find a way to get them through a shadow network. But instead of paying $10 a chip, they're paying $100.
Oh, wow. So it's a forced economic bleeding.
Precisely.
You are basically making the basic act of survival incredibly expensive.
And that bleeds their national reserves completely dry. Let's look at the financial flows, specifically systems like SWIFT.
Remind us what SWIFT is real quick.
It's the messaging network that international banks use to securely transfer money. Now, if you have the geopolitical leverage to lock a country out of that system, they quite literally cannot move money across borders to pay for anything.
Whether it's military hardware or just basic civilian infrastructure.
Exactly. And the immediate reaction of the targeted party is to try and establish alternative currencies or barter systems. But the macroeconomic consequence of that is brutal inflation, domestic unrest, and ultimately a shrinking defense budget.
Which completely shifts how you have to look at international power.
Totally.
I mean, it's no longer just a math equation of who has the biggest standing military or the most advanced fighter jets.
Right.
It's about who has the internal resilience to withstand a long-term, agonizing economic squeeze. It's a test of societal endurance.
And this brings us to the causal chain of the hidden war. Once a nation's economy is severely squeezed, once that oxygen is really thinning out, their infrastructure begins to weaken.
Because they can't afford to fix things.
Exactly. They can't afford the necessary upgrades, the maintenance, or even paying for the top-tier personnel. And that vulnerability sets the stage for the next logical step.
Okay, next.
Well, you've starved the resources. Now you paralyze the systems trying to manage those dwindling resources. You move to the technological front.
Now, wait, aren't we just talking about better drones or smarter missiles here?
Okay.
Because when we talk about tech in war, the default assumption is usually just better hardware.
Sure, yeah.
I instantly think of autonomous drones, satellite-guided artillery, or AI targeting software. The assumption is that tech just makes the physical hammer hit harder, you know?
What's fascinating here is that the most dangerous technological front has almost nothing to do with the physical battlefield.
Really?
Yeah, it is an entirely parallel competitive space. We are talking about digital infrastructure, information systems, and the fundamental capacity to control and protect operational data.
Okay, so a different kind of tech entirely.
Think of the economy as the oxygen, like you said earlier, and this technological front as the nation's nervous system.
Oh, I see. So we aren't talking about hacking a drone in midair. We're talking about, like, hacking the software that tells a city's water purification plant how much chlorine to add.
Yes, exactly. The tactics involve infiltrating civilian and governmental systems, jamming critical information channels, and degrading a nation's operational capacity from the inside out.
That sounds incredibly invasive.
It is. Consider the industrial control systems, they're often called SCADA systems, that run power grids, traffic networks, and manufacturing plants.
Okay.
These are essentially programmable logic controllers. Now, if a highly sophisticated, state-sponsored cyber unit can inject malicious code into those controllers,
What happens?
well, they can tell a physical centrifuge to spin so fast that it tears itself apart, all while the control room monitors are falsely reporting that everything is operating normally.
Wow. That is terrifying.
It really is.
I mean, it's literal physical destruction achieved entirely through digital manipulation. But how do you scale that? I mean, a broken centrifuge is bad, but it doesn't win a war.
You scale it by targeting the foundational layers of a society. You execute a coordinated disruption where the stock market clearinghouses go offline, banking apps freeze, and the emergency response dispatch goes completely dark all at the exact same moment.
Basically the Tuesday morning scenario we talked about at the start.
Exactly. The impact of that is sheer systemic paralysis. It creates a level of panic and logistical chaos that a traditional bombing run could only dream of achieving.
I can't even imagine.
But, and this is the crucial part, it is incredibly hard to clearly define or measure compared to, say, a crater in the ground.
Right, because a crater is undeniable. Yeah. I mean, if a building is flattened, you can dig through the rubble, find the shrapnel, read the serial numbers, and say, okay, this specific missile came from this specific country.
Exactly. The evidence is right there. But a systemic network failure, a catastrophic power outage,
Much harder to prove.
way harder. That can easily be disguised as a software glitch or a localized lack of maintenance or just the work of an independent rogue hacker group.
Oh.
It provides the attacker with plausible deniability while achieving the exact same strategic goal as a kinetic strike. It cripples the adversary's ability to function and respond.
Okay, so let's follow the chain here. You've choked the economy, turning off the oxygen. You've infected the nervous system, paralyzing the technology and causing internal chaos.
Right.
But you can't just operate in a vacuum. The rest of the world is watching this happen. And this brings us to the third layer of the hidden war.
The information front.
Yes, and here's where it gets really interesting. Because in this environment, information is no longer just data. It isn't just public relations or news broadcasts. Information is a literal tactical weapon.
It is the battle for reality itself. This front isn't primarily concerned with what is actually happening on the ground or in the server rooms.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it is entirely focused on how those events are perceived.
The actual truth of the event is secondary to the narrative being spun about the event. That seems like a massive gamble.
Well, it's not a gamble. It's the core geopolitical reality today. The parties involved, whether it's the US, Israel, Iran, or the various proxy groups operating in the region, they are actively engaged in massive, highly sophisticated campaigns to shape perceptions and manufacture image advantages.
So propaganda, basically.
It's way beyond that. The mechanism for this has evolved far beyond traditional propaganda leaflets. We are talking about the deployment of bot networks, synthetic media, and amplified domestic friction.
How does that actually work in practice, though? Let's say a country's power grid goes down from a cyber attack. What does the information weapon look like in that specific moment?
In that moment, the attacking nation will flood the target nation's social media ecosystems with narratives blaming the blackout on their own government's corruption or incompetence.
So they point the finger back at the victim.
Exactly. They will amplify existing political divisions. They aren't just trying to say, we are the good guys. They are actively trying to erode the targeted population's trust in their own leadership.
That is devious.
And simultaneously, on the global stage, they are painting the adversary as unstable or overly aggressive.
Because the global stage is where the real consequences are handed out. Wait, that loops us right back into the first front, the economy.
That is the exact mechanism. You nailed it. If you successfully control the narrative and paint the adversary as the unquestionable aggressor or just an unstable threat, you can justify your actions to the United Nations.
Right.
You can convince global allies why those international economic sanctions need to be tightened even further.
Turning the oxygen valve even tighter.
Exactly. Or, on the flip side, you can generate international support and financial aid for your own defense. Controlling the story directly dictates the geopolitical consequences.
Wow.
The information front is the key that locks or unlocks international pressure.
It's a giant self-feeding loop. And that brings us to a really crucial part of understanding this conflict architecture. These three fronts, the economic oxygen, the technological nervous system, and the informational reality, they do not operate independently.
So at all.
You don't just run an economic campaign on Monday and a cyber campaign on Tuesday.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the real danger lies in the synergistic effect of these fronts.
How they work together.
Right. It fundamentally changes the rules of engagement because it creates a coordinated sequence of systemic degradation. Let's look at how this plays out in a realistic scenario based on the file.
Okay, lay it up for us.
First, a multi-year economic pressure campaign steadily weakens a nation's military budget. And because the defense budget shrinks, they literally can't afford to patch the vulnerabilities in their critical cybersecurity infrastructure.
They leave a door unlocked because they couldn't afford the new deadbolt.
Exactly. Then, a highly targeted cyber operation walks right through that unlocked door and disrupts their emergency response grid during a period of heightened tension.
The paralysis phase.
Yep. And while the targeted nation's leadership is scrambling in the dark, unable to communicate effectively, a massive, coordinated information campaign floods global media.
Spinning the narrative before the victim even knows what happened.
The narrative takes hold globally, before the targeted nation can even get their broadcast networks back online to deny it.
That is incredible.
Economic weakness enables the technological strike, and the technological paralysis prevents any defense against the informational assault. It is a completely interconnected system.
So, what does this all mean for the concept of war itself? Because from a strategic standpoint, the most frustrating and dangerous part of this entire hidden war seems to be the sheer difficulty of identification.
Yeah, the term used for this operational space is the gray zone.
The gray zone.
The gray zone exists in the space between normal peacetime competition and declared kinetic armed conflict. And the strategic math of the gray zone relies entirely on ambiguity.
Because you can't see it.
Because these actions are invisible. A rejected international bank transfer, a corrupted line of code, a vast network of inauthentic social media accounts attribution is nearly impossible to prove immediately.
And that time delay is everything, isn't it? If someone launches a missile at your base, your radar tracks it and you fire back in minutes. The law of armed conflict is clear.
Crystal clear.
But if someone crashes your banking sector, you can't just guess who did it and start dropping bombs.
You can't. In geopolitics, if you cannot prove who attacked you definitively and immediately, you lose the legal and diplomatic justification for a kinetic retaliation.
Wow.
The delay in attribution is the weapon. It might take your intelligence agencies 3 weeks of digital forensics to conclusively prove which state-sponsored group wrote the malware that shut down your hospitals.
3 weeks is a lifetime.
And you cannot fire a cruise missile 3 weeks later over a line of code. The international community would condemn you as the aggressor.
It's an intentional paralysis. It allows highly aggressive, incredibly damaging actions to take place without ever crossing the specific threshold that would trigger a physical military response.
It completely flips the traditional defensive posture. The gray zone allows a nation to wage a devastating systemic war while technically, legally remaining at peace.
That is so wild to wrap your head around.
The targeted opponent is paralyzed because they spend all their time and resources just trying to definitively prove they were attacked in the first place.
Which brings us to the long-term geopolitical consequences. When we look at the historical timeline of conflicts in the Middle East, the military strikes the visible explosions. They shape the short-term reality.
Right, the immediate headlines.
They take out a specific facility or eliminate a specific operative. They achieve immediate tactical objectives. But these invisible fronts
determine the long-term survival of the state. They rot the foundation from the inside out. They determine a nation's internal political stability.
Because the people are losing faith.
Yes, they degrade its economic resilience, making it impossible to project power regionally. They fundamentally alter its future standing on the global stage.
So it's a slow burn.
Exactly. These are systemic factors you cannot see changing on a Tuesday morning, but they are the exact factors that ultimately dictate who wins and who loses the broader geopolitical struggle over decades.
The lines between war and peace haven't just blurred. They've been completely erased. I mean, war is no longer an event with a clear start date, a defined battlefield, and a formal surrender.
No, it's not.
It is a continuous, invisible, and agonizing pressure. It is harder to control, it is wildly harder to predict, and it lasts so much longer than any traditional military campaign.
Which really raises an important question, and it's the exact strategic dilemma that military planners are currently wrestling with right now.
What's that?
Well, if a geopolitical conflict spreads completely across all these invisible fronts, if the US, Israel, Iran, and their proxies are locked in a continuous state of attacking each other's economies, hacking each other's power grids, and manipulating global narratives, what actually decides how it ends?
Right. When the war is everywhere in the ether and nowhere on the ground, how do you sign a peace treaty? You can't just sign a piece of paper that says, "We promise to stop secretly writing bad code."
Is there even an exit ramp when all parties have pushed so far into the gray zone? The complexity of de-escalation is now exponentially higher.
Because you can't just pull the troops back.
You can recall troops from a border, yes, but you cannot easily recall a self-replicating digital virus that has embedded itself in an adversary's infrastructure. Nor can you unpublish a fabricated narrative that millions of people already believe.
The damage is already done.
The mechanisms for stopping the hidden war simply do not exist yet.
It really makes you rethink everything you read in the daily news. You have to look past the physical events, past the press conferences, and look for the invisible pressures.
Always look for what's not being said.
Look for the thinning oxygen, the paralyzed systems, and the manipulated realities. We started today by imagining a morning where the systems we rely on simply stop working without a single shot being fired.
A very real possibility.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Building on this reality of the gray zone. If warfare is now continuous, if it relies on ambiguity, and if it is deeply woven into the daily digital and economic systems that keep our modern lives running,
Here it comes.
is it possible that a nation or even an entire society could already be losing a devastating war without ever realizing they were fighting one?
It is the defining question of our era.
A war with no explosions.
Yeah.
Until next time, keep questioning what you see and, more importantly, what you don't see.